Good evening, friends. Take a deep breath and let it go. If you can, dim your lights until the world feels like twilight, even if it's midday outside your window. Pull your blanket close, let your pillow rise softly beneath your head, and allow your shoulders to drop as though gravity has decided to do the heavy lifting tonight. Tonight, we'll drift very slowly into the quiet waters of history, specifically the murky, moonlit world of a Civil War submarine that refused to be forgotten. And if this calm little voyage helps you unwind, tap like and subscribe, only if it feels right. No pressure. Just gentle curiosity floating alongside you. Now, imagine the hush of the late 1800s coast, the kind that hums with the sound of tiny waves brushing against iron hulls. The air is damp with salt. It tastes a little like rust and a little like hope. In the darkness, lanterns wink from wooden docks, each one trembling in the wind as if nervous to be awake. Somewhere, a ship's cat meows in protest at the chill. And beneath all of this, quietly, almost shyly, rests a machine shaped like a metal cigar. The H.L. Hunley, the first submarine to ever sink an enemy ship in battle, and the first to never come home. Let me tell you about her. The Hunley began her life not as a grand naval project, but as an experiment in daring. Built in Mobile, Alabama, in 1863, she was small, barely 40 feet long, and powered not by an engine but by human legs. Yes, legs. Picture 8 men sitting shoulder to shoulder, turning a long crankshaft, as if they're competing in the world's slowest bicycle race. No fresh air, no sunlight, just the rhythmic squeak of iron and the warm breath of too many dreams in too little space. When you close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the creak of gears, the slow heartbeat of metal against water. Somewhere someone coughs, someone else hums a tune to keep the rhythm. It's oddly peaceful in a claustrophobic way, like camping inside a sardine tin with 7 friends and one shared purpose. That purpose was bold. Sneak up on Union ships blockading Charleston Harbor and poke holes in them with a makeshift spear of explosives. A torpedo on a stick, essentially, attached to the front of the submarine. It sounds ridiculous, and it was, but also revolutionary. This was 1864, the same year most people still thought germs were a rumor, and the average cure for seasickness involved lemons and wishful thinking. The Hunley's first attempts didn't go so well. She sank not once, not twice, but 3 times before she ever saw combat. Each time she went down, someone decided, well, maybe she just needs a bit more optimism. Crews were recruited again and again because hope, it seems, is buoyant, even when submarines are not. On one unlucky day, the Hunley sank during a test dive, taking with her her namesake, Horace Lawson Hunley himself. The inventor who dreamed her up became one of her earliest ghosts. If this were a ghost story, he'd still be there, polishing brass fittings in the dark and muttering about funding cuts. But tonight, we'll keep it gentle, more melancholy than macabre. After each accident, the Confederate Navy would fish her out, patch her dents, and say something encouraging, like 3rd time's the charm. And, in a sense, they were right. On the evening of February 17th, 1864, the Hunley set out on her final voyage. The target, the Union ship USS Housatonic. The sea was calm but tense, like a held breath. The submarine glided forward, slow, deliberate, almost sleepy in its movement. The crew cranked their handles, and the little vessel moved through the water with the patience of a dream. When the torpedo struck, it worked. The Housatonic sank within minutes, marking the first successful submarine attack in history. And then, silence. The Hunley never came back. For more than a century, the submarine lay lost beneath the silt and seaweed of Charleston Harbor. Some said the explosion killed the crew instantly. Others imagined they surfaced, saw the lights of home, and then sank again like a tired sigh. Whatever the truth, the Hunley slept there, undisturbed, unbothered, wrapped in sand like an artifact that wasn't ready to be remembered. Now, imagine that quiet. Imagine the way time moves underwater, slow, syrupy, muffled. Crabs scuttle across iron, oysters make a home on rivets, and the hull becomes less a machine than a reef. Every few decades, a storm passes overhead, stirring silt into a soft, grey snowstorm. Then stillness returns. For 131 years, she rested like that. Long enough for her story to fade into rumour. Long enough that children in Charleston whispered that you could still hear the crew cranking in the deep if you pressed your ear to the waves. Then, in 1995, a team of marine archaeologists finally found her. It wasn't dramatic. No swashbuckling, no trumpet fanfare. Just careful work and patient sonar sweeps until a ghostly shape appeared on their screens. When they realized what they'd found, there was a hush. Even the gulls seemed to pause. Raising the Hunley was delicate work. She was heavy with water and history, both prone to leaking if handled wrong. So the team lifted her slowly, inch by inch, suspended in a cradle of straps. When she finally broke the surface, after more than a century below, the watching crowd cheered, but softly, as if afraid to wake her. I like to picture that moment in slow motion. Sunlight touching rust for the first time since Abraham Lincoln was alive. Droplets of salt water falling like diamonds. And below decks, the silent shapes of the crew, still at their posts. Inside, archaeologists found the remains of all 8 men. They were astonishingly well preserved. Buttons still clinging to coats, shoes in place, even a gold coin still tucked in one pocket, dented from where it had once stopped a bullet. It was as though time had hit pause mid-sentence. But the real mystery wasn't what they found. It was who they found. Records were sketchy, names mismatched, and speculation had turned the crew into legends. For decades, historians argued which man sat where, who steered, who cranked, who dreamed last. Enter DNA analysis. In the early 2000s, forensic scientists took delicate samples, bone, tooth, strands of hair still clinging to fragments of scalp, and compared them to living descendants of soldiers across the South and even Europe. It was meticulous, almost reverent work. Each test result was like a whisper from the past, correcting old rumors. It turned out, not all of the crew were who people thought they were. One man, long believed to be an Irish immigrant, turned out to have deep German roots. Another, assumed to be a local sailor, had family links reaching all the way to Scandinavia. The ocean, it seemed, had been cradling a multicultural time capsule all along, and somehow that feels fitting. The Hunley was, after all, a dream built from both desperation and collaboration. Engineers, inventors, adventurers from many walks of life. Maybe that's why she captured imaginations. She wasn't just a machine of war, but a fragile human hope welded together by strangers who believed in something improbable. Picture those scientists late at night. Lab lights low. The quiet hum of freezers keeping samples safe. They probably spoke softly without realizing it, as if not to disturb the spirits in the test tubes. The idea that modern DNA could reach back through salt water and sediment to name forgotten men. That's not just science. That's a kind of bedtime magic. Sometimes I wonder what those sailors would think if they could see their faces reconstructed today. 3D models with cheekbones and smiles, displayed in glass cases where school children press their noses to see. Maybe they'd be embarrassed, maybe proud, maybe a little sleepy. History, after all, isn't always grand. Often, it's quietly absurd. A submarine built before the light bulb, powered by calves and courage, now famous because of molecules. There's poetry in that. Outside the lab, the world moved on. Cars, airplanes, the internet. Yet the Hunley's rediscovery reminded people that even the smallest human stories can echo for centuries. The crew were finally buried in 2004 with full military honors. Thousands attended, some dressed in period uniforms, others in flip-flops. The line between reenactment and remembrance blurred, as it often does. But the ceremony was peaceful. The last of the crankmen could finally rest without turning another inch. As you settle deeper into your pillow, maybe you can feel a little of that rest too. The rhythm of the waves, the creak of the hull, the soft thrum of oars overhead. History is full of noise when we study it in daylight, but at night it slows to a heartbeat, and that heartbeat still echoes beneath Charleston Harbor, in museums, in gentle YouTube narrations whispered to drowsy listeners like you. It reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary adventures end not in glory, but in quiet mystery. So as the first chapter closes, picture the Hunley resting again, not under sand this time, but beneath the calm surface of your imagination. The crew no longer needs to row. The sea has taken over, lulling them, and maybe you, into sleep. And as we leave that soft, watery world behind, let your thoughts drift to the gentle pulse of history's next current, the one waiting patiently in Chapter 2. Now that we've left the hush of the harbour behind, let's drift somewhere softer, somewhere between memory and imagination. If you're still awake, take a slow breath in. Feel the air pass coolly through your nose, and then let it go, long and low, like the sigh of an old ship settling against its moorings. If your eyes are already fluttering closed, that's fine too. Just listen, and let the words do the rowing for you. Tonight, I want to tell you about the letters, the ones never delivered, never opened, never even sealed with the wax that made them official. The Hunley's crew left behind more than a sunken boat. They left traces of themselves scattered through the paper trails of the 19th century. Enlistment forms, receipts for uniforms, a half-finished note tucked inside a ledger. The wayward handwriting of men who didn't know they'd be remembered. Picture, for a moment, a candlelit desk in 1864 Charleston. The air smells faintly of salt and whale oil. A quill scratches against cheap paper, uneven, hesitant, as if the writer keeps stopping to find the right word. Dearest Mary, one letter might begin, though we'll never know for sure. The paper didn't survive, but the sentiment lingers. You can almost hear him thinking through the ink. What do you say before sailing in a machine that's half experiment, half tomb? Maybe he kept it simple. Maybe he wrote, "I'll be home by Easter." Or maybe he joked, "If this contraption sinks again, I'll just open a fish market down there." It's easy to imagine the faint smile tugging at his lips as he folded the letter, the creak of the chair beneath him, the soft rasp of fabric as he sealed the envelope he'd never get to mail. Outside, Charleston's streets would have been quiet, except for the clip-clop of a single horse and the occasional call of a night watchman. In that stillness, hope and fear must have sounded exactly alike. When archaeologists excavated the Hunley, they found personal effects, their buttons, coins, bits of paper too waterlogged to read. One scrap bore the faint outline of handwriting that dissolved before anyone could decipher it. It feels almost merciful, doesn't it? As if the sea decided some words were meant only for the person who wrote them. Still, historians piece together their stories through records on land. One crewman, Lieutenant George Dixon, was the one with the famous gold coin, the bullet-dented keepsake that had saved his life earlier in the war. He carried it everywhere, a tiny, shining superstition. The inscription read, "My life preserver." It was given to him by his sweetheart, Queenie Bennett. You can imagine her handwriting, maybe looping and confident, when she gifted it to him. And you can imagine him tracing the coin's edge before every dive, the way someone might touch a lucky charm before boarding a flight today. There's something heartbreakingly ordinary about it. Even heroes, and accidental inventors of the submarine age, needed reminders that someone was waiting for them at home. Let's slow the scene even further. Imagine the tavern where the crew might have met on their final evening ashore. The smell of fried catfish, a fiddler in the corner playing a tune everyone pretends to hate but secretly hums along to. The men talk quietly, voices thick with the drawl of the South, with Irish and German and Scottish lilt mingled in like instruments in an off-key orchestra. The bartender wipes the counter, pretending not to listen as they swap small dreams. Land, wives, better pay, maybe even seeing the world if peace ever comes. Someone jokes that the Hunley will one day have her own song. They laugh because the idea seems absurd. Who would sing about a submarine? Yet somewhere in the future, our present, millions would whisper their story before sleep, exactly like this. And maybe that's the trick history plays. It hides legends inside lulls. When I think of those men, I don't picture them as statues in uniforms. I see them as ordinary people having a slightly strange evening. A man tying his shoelace too tightly. Another carefully trimming his mustache with a shaky hand. Someone complaining that his uniform itches in all the wrong places. And someone else staring at the bottom of his mug, wondering whether he should have another drink or go home and finish that letter. You can almost hear the wooden floorboards creak as they leave, the distant roll of the tide waiting to carry them toward the Hunley. Let's follow them down to the dock. The air is cooler now, that gentle kind of chill that seeps through wool coats, but not enough to be unpleasant. The moon glints off the water like spilled milk. In the distance, frogs croak from the marsh, joined by the faint hum of insects. Nature's endless nighttime orchestra. The submarine waits at the pier, silent, curved, and oddly delicate in the lamplight. The crew moves slowly, not out of fear, but familiarity. They know every rivet, every rope, every stubborn bolt that requires a tap from a mallet before it behaves. They speak softly, as though noise could disturb the sea's mood. It's comforting to imagine their calm. They weren't heroes in that moment, just men at work, checking ballast tanks, adjusting oars, trading the kind of jokes that only sound funny at midnight. One of them, perhaps Dixon again, might have carried that unmailed letter in his coat pocket, telling himself he'd send it after the mission. After all, there was always after, until there wasn't. Fast forward now, gently, to the late 1990s. Scientists in clean gloves hold what's left of those men's possessions. Each object is a whisper preserved by salt. They document every buckle, every thread, every speck of silt, as if each could tell a story. And maybe, in a way, they do. I remember watching a documentary once where a conservator held a tiny glass vial of sediment from the Hunley's interior. He said the grains were finer than sugar, and smelled faintly of iron. He smiled, softly, almost shyly, and said, "You can still see where they touched." That struck me, the idea that human fingerprints can last longer than empires. Even the unmailed letters, though lost, survive in the spaces they left behind. The people they were meant for, families, lovers, friends, grew old, told stories, and kept the memory alive. The letters became myths, and myths are the most faithful postmen of all. If you listen closely now, you might hear the sound of pen scratching on paper again, not from 1864, but from today. Maybe it's you writing a note before bed, a grocery list, or a message you'll send tomorrow. The same small human urge connects you to them, the need to leave something written, even if it's never read. There's comfort in that. Letters are like time capsules without deadlines. Let's linger on that thought a while. Outside your window, perhaps there's a night breeze. Maybe the trees are swaying just enough to make a soft, steady rustle. It could almost be the sound of waves against an old hull. You don't need to go anywhere. The ocean is right there, tucked into the rhythm of your breath. Now imagine one of those scientists decades later, sitting at her desk, writing her own letter never sent, a lab report, typed and technical, but in its way, just as emotional. She writes about mitochondrial sequences and ancestry lines, but pauses, maybe, to look at a photo of the crew. There's a tenderness in the way she notes that one man's DNA matched a family in Germany who had no idea their ancestor crossed the Atlantic. You can feel her quiet satisfaction, less triumph than gratitude. She, too, is part of the chain of correspondence, finally delivering a message that was 131 years late. Some nights, I think that's what history really is. A giant, ever-moving mail system where the past keeps sending letters to the present, hoping someone will finally open them. We're just the sleepy clerks who file them into stories. Let's pause for a moment. Breathe in again. The air is calm. Maybe your blanket feels a little heavier now, in that comforting way that signals rest. If your mind drifts, that's fine. Let it. Let the letters float out to sea. They'll find their destination eventually. As our chapter closes, imagine one last scene. Charleston Harbor at sunrise. The sky is pale pink, the color of old paper. A gull cries overhead, the sound stretching thin and sweet. Somewhere beneath that glassy water rests the memory of the men who never mailed their goodbyes. And above, on land, the descendants who finally read them in the language of science, love, and curiosity. Maybe that's all any of us hope for, to be understood someday, even if it takes a century. So let's fold this chapter like a letter. Seal it gently with a sigh, and as we set it aside, let your mind wander toward the next part of our journey, a place where invention meets imagination, and history hums like a lullaby beneath the waves. Now, dear listener, let your eyelids grow heavy. We'll pick up the next envelope, Chapter 3, once the tides of sleep have carried you far enough to dream. Settle back, my friend. Adjust your blanket if you need to. Feel the warmth gather around your shoulders, and let the world outside grow dim. The next part of our drifting tale begins not with thunder or drums, but with a quiet inhale, the kind you take before a dive. Tonight we return to the Hunley, not as explorers this time, but as curious daydreamers wondering how on earth 8 men managed to make a machine move with nothing but muscle, faith, and the occasional grumble. The first submarines were not powered by engines of steel or steam. They were powered by breath and bone, and a surprising amount of calf strength. Picture the inside of the Hunley. It's smaller than most living rooms. The walls sweat with condensation. Rivets glimmer faintly like tiny stars in lamplight. The air smells of oil and iron and a hint of humanity. Boots, wool, maybe someone's breakfast biscuit from hours before. In the center runs a long crankshaft, fitted with handles like the spokes of a strange carousel. Each man grips one, shoulders bent forward, knees nearly touching the man ahead. No fancy uniforms here, just sleeves rolled up, brows damp, the occasional nervous joke. When I close my eyes, I imagine the sound. Creak, clank, whoosh. 8 pairs of lungs pulling air, 8 sets of legs turning time itself. It's the world's slowest rowing machine, and every revolution presses them deeper into history. The rhythm is hypnotic. You could almost fall asleep to it, if you weren't inside it. One of the crew, a machinist named Miller, was said to hum sea shanties to keep pace. Imagine a tune so slow it could rock a ship to sleep. Lowlands Away, maybe, or Shenandoah, drawn out until the syllables stretched like honey. The others joined in quietly, not for entertainment, but for synchronization. It's easier to breathe together when there's a song to measure by. The irony is sweet. They were inside an invention meant to conquer the sea, yet they themselves sounded like waves. Above them, Charleston's harbor rested in silence. No one knew that below those calm waters, 8 men were peddling a dream. No propellers of steel roaring, no smoke, just human persistence. Their oxygen would last only a short while, an hour if they were lucky. So they rationed each breath like coins in a thin wallet. They learned to breathe shallowly, steadily, the way you do when listening to a bedtime story you don't want to interrupt. Sometimes I think that's why the Hunley feels strangely alive even now. It was built from human rhythm. Every inch of progress came from heartbeat and breath. The submarine itself became an extension of their bodies, a mechanical lung, exhaling bubbles into the dark. If you've ever rowed a boat at night, you know that strange mixture of peace and unease. The water beneath you invisible, the stars mirrored above. Now shrink that boat to a metal tube barely wide enough for your shoulders, seal it tight, and add the awareness that a single bolt could decide your fate. Yet still, they volunteered. That tells you something about the human appetite for adventure, or possibly about boredom during wartime. Engineers later said the Hunley moved about 4 knots at full speed. That's roughly the pace of a distracted duck. But underwater, even a distracted duck can feel heroic. And, honestly, there's poetry in the slowness. Modern submarines cut through oceans. The Hunley glided, whispered, drifted. It was less a ship than a collective meditation. Let's drift with them for a while. You can almost feel the wooden crank handle under your palms. Smooth, slightly damp, warm from use. Each turn pushes against the water's resistance, like stirring syrup. The lamplight flickers. Shadows stretch across faces. The commander, Dixon, crouches near the forward hatch, whispering occasional directions. His voice is calm, low, steady, the kind of voice you trust even when everything creaks ominously. Outside, the harbor is moonlit. Fish dart away from the strange shadow moving across their territory. Perhaps a crab pauses mid-scuttle to stare at this new creature made of rivets and ambition. Then silence again. The sea forgives quickly. Inside, the air thickens. One man wipes condensation from the glass viewport with a rag already soaked. Another adjusts the ballast valve, listening for the soft hiss that means the trim is right. The temperature climbs. It's a strange, communal sauna of courage. And yet, they keep turning. Creak, clank, whoosh. I like to think someone cracked a joke then. Maybe about how their mothers warned them against tight spaces, or how at least there were no mosquitoes underwater. Laughter, even muffled, has a way of loosening fear. Maybe it echoed down the hull, mingling with the hum of the crank, until it became part of the ship's personality. There's an odd tenderness in imagining them this way, not as tragic figures, but as 8 friends doing something wildly impractical with quiet determination. They didn't know they were building the future. They were just doing their job, one slow revolution at a time. When archaeologists later studied the interior, they found impressions in the sediment where the men had sat. You could still trace the curve of a knee, the print of a heel. It was as though the submarine had memorized their shapes. One scientist described it as a fossil of teamwork. I love that phrase. You can almost picture the ship sighing, still remembering the rhythm of its human heart. Now, if you're still awake, shift your focus to the surface world of that era. The strange contrast between the primitive and the visionary. This was the 1860s. Telegraphs clicking, locomotives chugging, ladies in hoop skirts writing letters with ink that took hours to dry. And somewhere among all that, a group of inventors thought, yes, we can conquer the sea by pedaling really hard. It sounds ridiculous enough to be comforting. It reminds us that progress is often powered by persistence rather than perfection. The first airplane, the first light bulb, the first internet connection. They all stumbled before they soared. The Hunley just happened to stumble underwater. Think for a moment about breath again. In the confined hull, air was precious. Every inhale took something from the group. Every exhale gave something back. It was an ecosystem of trust. You can almost hear their synchronized breathing. 8 quiet metronomes keeping time in the dark. Maybe that's why the story feels so soothing now. It mirrors the natural rhythm of our own rest. In, out, turn, glide. In, out. History as lullaby. When the Hunley finally struck the Housatonic, that balance broke for a moment. A flash underwater, a thud that vibrated through their bones. Some scientists believe the blast shockwave stunned the crew instantly. Others think they survived a while longer, drifting until oxygen faded. Either way, the ending was peaceful enough that their positions inside were calm when found. No sign of panic, no struggle. Just stillness, as though they'd all exhaled at once and let the ocean take over. That image is strange but comforting too. They began as an engine of breath, and they ended by giving that breath back to the sea. When conservators raised the submarine, they carefully measured everything. The crank handles, the benches, the iron plates. Then they built replicas. Volunteers were invited to sit inside and turn the crank, to feel what the crew had felt. Most lasted only minutes before the air felt too heavy. It gave new respect for what the original 8 had endured. One volunteer, red-faced and gasping, said afterward, "It's like pedaling through pudding." That might be the most accurate historical description of the Hunley's propulsion ever recorded. Still, I find it beautiful that the first submarine wasn't driven by roaring engines or explosions of fuel, but by cooperation. The Hunley literally could not move unless everyone worked together. If one man stopped, the rhythm faltered. It was democracy in motion, a crank-powered chorus. Maybe that's the real legacy, beyond warfare or invention. The quiet reminder that progress often begins with shared effort and a steady pace. As the chapter winds down, picture that rhythmic motion fading into the sound of your own breathing. The creak becomes a whisper, the water a lullaby. Above, dawn begins to tint the horizon. Below, the Hunley rests again, her metal bones remembering every push and pull. And if you listen closely, past the hum of your room, past the ticking clock, you might still hear it, Creak, clank, whoosh. The soft machinery of determination, still turning somewhere deep in history's ocean. So let the sound guide you now. In, out, turn, glide. You're part of the rhythm too, floating between wake and sleep. And as you drift, we'll leave the crew at their posts, the last crank slowing to a stop, the last breath shared like a secret. The water settles, the story exhales. And now, as we close this chapter, let your thoughts follow the trail of bubbles rising gently to the surface, each one a memory, each one lighter than the last. We'll meet them again when the tide brings us to the next calm harbor. Chapter 4. Good evening again, friend. If your eyes are heavy, you can let them close now. The story will keep watch for you. Maybe your blanket feels like a quiet weight, or your breathing has begun to match the slow roll of a tide. That's the right pace for this chapter, because tonight, the sea isn't only a setting, it's a memory. It remembers more than anyone expects. Imagine Charleston Harbor before the city lights, before the ferry horns and the tourists with cameras. The air tastes faintly of salt and marsh grass. The gulls are unhurried. In the distance, the Atlantic stretches out like a sleeping giant, its back rising and falling with every sigh. On the shore, wooden pilings lean slightly, worn smooth by years of tidal gossip. They've heard every story, of trade, of storms, of one small submarine that never came home. The harbor remembers that night in 1864. If you listen closely, it might still murmur it back in pieces. The slap of oars, the whisper of men boarding in the dark, the brief flare of a lantern quickly snuffed out, then quiet again. So quiet that even the frogs paused their song, sensing something solemn underway. Time did what time always does. It rolled forward, gentle as a wave but unstoppable. The city above changed its rhythm. Cotton ships came and went, wars ended, telegraphs clicked, jazz floated through open windows. The harbor watched it all, steady as a heartbeat. Beneath its surface, silt settled over the Hunley like layers of sleep. Each storm tucked her in a little deeper. For generations, fishermen passed stories down while mending nets. Somewhere out there, they'd say, pointing vaguely seaward, lies the ghost boat. Children leaned closer, eyes wide. Some swore they'd seen bubbles rise from the spot. Others claimed the sea grew oddly still when you rode over it. Maybe it was superstition, or maybe, just maybe, the harbor was guarding its secret carefully, like a friend keeping a promise. There's something soothing about the idea of a place remembering what people forget. Human memory fades like ink left in the sun, but landscapes keep their own diary, one written in tides and sediment. A harbor, after all, has no reason to lie. It tells the truth slowly, through hints. A relic caught in a net, a sound beneath sonar, a shimmer that makes a diver pause. The Hunley slept there for 131 years, but the water never stopped whispering her name. Let's pause here and breathe in that thought, that the world remembers us even when we forget ourselves. The idea is comforting, isn't it? Like leaving a note somewhere safe, knowing the earth will keep it for later. Now, drift ahead to 1995 again, the day the harbor finally decided to reveal her secret. The search team's boats rocked gently on the water, sonar scanning in quiet loops. The air smelled of diesel and salt, but underneath was something older, that deep ocean scent of rust and shells. When the scanner first caught a curved shadow in the silt, one of the archaeologists said it felt like the harbor had sighed. After a century of holding her breath, she exhaled. The divers who went down described the scene as peaceful beyond belief. Imagine descending into green darkness where sound barely exists. The silt lifts lazily at every movement, like flour stirred into water. Shapes emerge slowly. First the curve of the bow, then the hatch, then the delicate spine of rivets trailing off into the sand. No drama, no danger. Just stillness and respect. Even the fish seem to keep their distance, circling quietly as witnesses. When the submarine was lifted at last, the harbour felt strangely empty for a moment. Like a house after a beloved guest moves out. Tidy, quiet, but missing a certain warmth. Some locals said the tides changed for a week afterward, running a little higher than usual, as though the sea were adjusting to a lighter heart. It's the sort of superstition historians roll their eyes at and secretly record in their notes. The Hunley went to a conservation lab nearby, where she rests in a large water tank, forever submerged in fresh, controlled calm. Visitors peer through glass and whisper, as if she could still hear them. And outside that building, the harbour continues its patient rhythm, still holding all the other stories no one has found yet. Charleston itself has its own way of remembering. Old houses lean toward the breeze, porches creak politely, and iron gates bloom with rusted curls. Somewhere, a tour guide in a straw hat points toward the water and says, "That's where she was found." Maybe a child tugs at their parent's hand, only half listening, already imagining an underwater adventure. That's how memory survives, not through monuments, but through curiosity passed from one quiet heart to another. If you stroll along the Battery in the evening, you can feel it. The cobblestones beneath your feet still echo with hooves from centuries past. The harbour wind smells the same as it did when wooden masts crowded the skyline. And when the sun dips low, the water turns to silver and gold, like the colour of that coin Lieutenant Dixon carried. History hums softly there, low enough to blend with the sound of the waves. Sometimes I imagine sitting on one of those old benches, notebook in lap, writing a letter addressed to no one in particular. Dear Harbour, thank you for remembering what we forgot. Thank you for holding it gently. And maybe, if the tide is kind, a ripple would rise and carry the message out to sea. It's strange how places can feel alive at night. A harbour especially. It breathes with the tide, sighs with the wind, and murmurs through the rigging of docked boats. The creak of rope against wood could almost be a lullaby if you let it. Sometimes the best way to hear history is simply to sit still enough for long enough. There's a story from the early 1900s about a fisherman named Caleb, who claimed he once snagged his net on something shaped like a giant fish made of stone. He cut the line rather than haul it up, deciding, as he later told neighbours, that some things prefer to stay asleep. He wasn't wrong. When the Hunley was discovered decades later, his old fishing route matched almost exactly. Perhaps the harbour had whispered to him too. I find that notion calming. That memory can be shared between sea and soul, between generations who never meet but dream in the same rhythm. It's what turns history from fact into feeling. And feeling, gentle and unhurried, is what carries us towards sleep. Take another slow breath now. Let it roll in like a small wave, then drift out again. The story moves at that same pace, steady, patient, circular. The harbour doesn't rush, and neither should we. As the years passed after the discovery, Charleston embraced its sleeping guest. The museum became a quiet pilgrimage site. School children pressed faces to the glass, whispering, "She's smaller than I thought." Historians gave lectures, locals brought flowers, poets wrote verses comparing the submarine to a seashell holding an echo. And the harbour watched, probably amused at all the fuss over what it had safeguarded all along. Even storms seem to bend politely now. When hurricanes sweep past, locals sometimes joke, "The Hunley will keep her safe. She's already seen worse." Humor as superstition, superstition as gratitude. It's a comfortable cycle, like waves tapping the shore and retreating again. There's a lesson tucked inside that, quiet but clear. Time erases sharp edges. Even tragedies smooth out until they shine softly, like stones polished by the tide. The Hunley began as a weapon, became a mystery, and now rests as a bedtime story whispered across generations. The harbor made sure of that. And if you're listening in half dream right now, that's all you need to remember. The harbor remembered, so you don't have to. You can let go of the details. Let the dates and names drift like leaves on water. The memory is safe. It will still be there in the morning. The tide outside your window, real or imagined, continues its ancient work. In, out, in, out. The same motion that once carried a submarine now rocks you toward rest. So as this chapter fades, imagine walking slowly away from the shoreline. The air cools on your face. The sound of waves grows softer, replaced by the steady rhythm of your heartbeat. Behind you, the harbor hums a final goodnight, low and content, proud to have kept its promise for over a century. And as we leave that gentle place, we'll carry with us the feeling of water still moving beneath the surface, a quiet reminder that even silence remembers. Now let your mind drift toward the next current, where invention meets the ordinary again, toward Chapter 5. Good evening again, dear listener. If you've drifted, welcome back. If you never left, then you're already halfway under, suspended between waking and dreaming, right where our next story likes to live. Let's start with something delicate. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights in a conservation lab. They flicker faintly, more out of habit than enthusiasm. The air here smells faintly of distilled water, paper towels, and the ghost of coffee someone reheated too many times. Rows of microscopes stand like polite soldiers, and in the center, under a pool of light, rests a small fragment of the past. A sliver of bone, a thread of uniform, a single tooth no bigger than a pebble. This is where ghosts are found now. Not in haunted houses, but in climate-controlled basements. And yet, the work feels every bit as mysterious. Imagine the scientists who arrived each morning at the Hunley Conservation Center. They didn't march in like conquerors. They tiptoed, almost reverent, as if entering a chapel. Their voices stayed low. "Good morning, gentlemen," one might whisper, greeting the 8 long-gone crewmen still resting in silt-filled benches. Then, slowly, gloves on, notebooks open, the day began. The tools of their trade aren't frightening. No Ouija boards or flickering candles. Just pipettes, tweezers, soft brushes. But what they do borders on magic. They coax stories from dust. They persuade molecules to remember what names once belonged to them. One scientist, a woman with patient hands and a ponytail that always escaped its clip, described the process as listening to whispers in a foreign language. DNA speaks softly after all. It hides in spirals thinner than silk, and it prefers you approach kindly. Too much heat, too much pressure, and it crumbles into silence again. So they work slowly, almost tenderly, washing bone fragments with brushes made of sable hair, collecting shavings smaller than salt grains. You can imagine the hush that fills that room, computers blinking like fireflies, air filters sighing rhythmically. It's the kind of soundscape you could fall asleep to. Each keystroke, each soft click, becomes part of a scientific lullaby. Outside, Charleston's humidity presses against the windows. Palmetto leaves rustle. The same harbour breeze that once rocked the Hunley now stirs the lab curtains, as though checking in. "Are you taking good care of my memories?" the wind seems to ask. The answer, whispered back by machines, is always yes. The work took years. DNA is patient but shy. Often a sample yielded nothing but static, just as a seashell gives only the illusion of the ocean's roar. Yet persistence pays in science as surely as in sleep. A decade of careful testing finally linked names to remains. Dixon, Miller, Carlson, and others whose descendants had no idea they shared blood with the submarine's legend. I love imagining those phone calls. "Hello, Mom. This may sound strange, but your great-great-uncle helped invent underwater history." There must have been pauses, laughter, disbelief, maybe tears. In living rooms across America and Europe, new family stories were born. Dinner tables buzzed with phrases like, "our ancestor in the Hunley." Somewhere, a child probably asked, "Did he meet mermaids?" And the adults, uncertain how to explain oxygen deprivation and 19th century engineering, probably said, "Maybe." The ghosts were no longer anonymous. They'd been reintroduced to the world, gently, with charts and cheek swabs instead of seances. That's the tender power of science. It doesn't shout, it restores. Let's wander a bit deeper into that lab. A conservator kneels beside the Hunley's hull, her breath fogging faintly against the glass barrier. She checks the temperature gauge, adjusts a dial, scribbles a note. Somewhere a small pump murmurs, circulating fresh water through the tank. The rhythm is slow, dependable, hypnotic. If machines could dream, this one would be dreaming of tides. Nearby, a technician studies the crew's personal artifacts. He holds a pipe whose bowl is still half filled with blackened tobacco. It smells faintly sweet. Virginia leaf, maybe. For a moment, he hesitates. That scent has crossed centuries. He closes his eyes, imagines the man who once lit it before a dive, filling the cramped cabin with a comforting curl of smoke. The technician smiles, then seals the pipe carefully in its case. The ghosts approve. There's another kind of haunting here too, the haunting of curiosity. Each question answered births two more. Why did the Hunley sink after success? Did the explosion stun the crew, or did oxygen simply fade away? Every researcher has a favorite theory, and each one tells it like a bedtime story, beginning always with, "I like to think." One theory suggests that when the torpedo detonated, the pressure waves stunned them instantly, a merciful ending. Another imagines they surfaced triumphantly, only for a sudden current to pull them under again. I prefer the version where they drifted in calm water, the moonlight silver on the waves, the crew quietly realizing they'd done something extraordinary. Maybe Dixon looked at the others and said softly, "Gentlemen, we made history." Then, with a final shared breath, they let the sea close around them like a blanket. That's not tragedy, that's completion. The scientists don't argue too fiercely about which version is true. They know that proof can be elusive, and in the meantime, mystery makes the story breathe. What matters most is care, keeping every relic safe, every fragment catalogued, every ghost spoken of with kindness. In that sense, their lab is less a workplace and more a sanctuary. Sometimes visitors arrive, school groups, journalists, the occasional wide-eyed novelist seeking inspiration. They lean over railings, voices hushed. The air smells of seawater and history's patience. Guides remind them not to tap the glass. She doesn't like loud noises, they joke, as though the submarine herself were listening. Maybe she is. When evening falls and the last visitors leave, the lab changes character. Lights dim. The hum of machines softens. One janitor sweeps slowly past the observation tank, his mop leaving gentle ripples on the wet floor. He glances up once at the silhouette of the submarine suspended in her watery cradle. "Good night, boys," he murmurs. It's not part of the job description, but he says it anyway, every night. A small ritual of respect. The line between ghost and guardian blurs here. The living keep the dead company. The dead lend the living perspective. There's peace in that balance. A calm that spreads outward like warmth through a blanket. If you're still with me, take another breath. Quiet and steady. Think of how your lungs expand, how invisible molecules move in and out, carrying traces of the same elements those men once breathed. Oxygen, nitrogen, tiny particles of stardust older than Earth itself. You're part of the same gentle chemistry. The real ghosts aren't frightening. They're familiar. They're the shared materials that drift endlessly between all lives. There's humor in that too. Imagine explaining to Dixon that, in the future, people would whisper his story to fall asleep. He'd raise an eyebrow, perhaps chuckle. "You mean the folks will pay to hear about crankshafts and ballast tanks?" "Yes, Lieutenant, because peace sometimes hides in the strangest corners, like a submarine's shadow or a scientist's sigh." Before long, new technology will map every rivet in three-dimensional detail. Holograms will show how the crew sat, how the gears turned. But even as the images sharpen, I suspect the edges of the story will stay soft. Some mysteries are meant to lull, not to solve. The phrase, "the gentle science of finding ghosts," suits this perfectly. It's a science built on patience, on listening, on compassion disguised as data. It reminds us that discovery need not be loud. Sometimes it's enough simply to recognize a presence, name it kindly, and let it rest. Now, as we near the close of this chapter, imagine the lab falling silent for the night. The last light clicks off. Only the glow from the tank remains, faint blue through the water. Dust motes drift like plankton. The Hunley sleeps again, watched over by the steady pulse of monitors, a heartbeat in glass. Outside, the harbor wind rattles a loose shutter. A heron lifts off with a soft splash. Somewhere far away, another scientist is still awake, typing a report titled "Final Confirmation of Identity." She pauses midway through a sentence, smiles to herself, and whispers, "Welcome back, gentlemen." Then she saves the file and shuts down the computer. The ghosts, at last, are found and kept. Take a deep breath now. Feel the science settle into quiet wonder. You don't have to remember the details, only the calm that comes when lost things are finally recognized. The lights fade, the sea exhales, and as we leave this chapter, we drift once more into darkness that feels not empty, but complete. Next, the story will carry us home, to reflection, to rest, to the shore where memory and dream meet again. Let your mind float there, gentle and unhurried, as we turn the page to chapter 6. Good evening once more, dear dreamer. If your eyelids are heavy, you can simply listen. The words will drift around you like water. If you're already half asleep, that's fine. This part is meant to sound like memory itself. The sea, you know, has the best memory of all. It keeps everything: songs, secrets, ships, even the footprints of clouds. Nothing is truly lost beneath it. Things just move slower. It is history's attic, its whispering archive. And among its countless treasures lies the echo of one small submarine that tried, briefly, to breathe like a man. Even now, more than a century later, the currents along Charleston's coast still brush over the path the Hunley once took. If you could see it from above, it would look like a line of darker blue threading through lighter water, a memory in motion. Every tide redraws it, and every dawn erases it, but somehow it's always there. Sometimes I like to imagine the sea talking to itself. "Ah, yes," it murmurs in the language of waves. "That little machine made of men and iron. Brave thing, heavy sleeper." Then it chuckles, a sound like foam kissing sand, and returns to its endless breathing. There's comfort in knowing that the ocean never judges. It doesn't care who won the war or which side painted its flags brighter. It only remembers effort, the crank of limbs, the shimmer of courage, the moment something human decided to join the rhythm of something vast. The Hunley became part of that rhythm, and in doing so, found its peace. Imagine standing at the shoreline today. The air smells faintly of salt and wet wood. The sun sets slowly, melting into copper across the ripples. Waves roll in, steady, dependable, never in a hurry. Each one carries a fragment of old time, a tiny fleck of the past dissolved in foam. Maybe one of those flecks once brushed against the Hunley's hull. Maybe it carries the echo of a crank's turning, or a whisper shared between crewmen. The sea doesn't discriminate between atoms. It just keeps everything moving. Nearby, a museum sign tells visitors that the submarine is now preserved, safe from decay. Children press sticky palms to the glass, murmuring questions. Parents nod, pretending to know the answers. "It's very old," they say. "It was the first of its kind." Outside, the wind answers more gently. It still is. History, after all, isn't a line. It's a tide. It ebbs and flows, returns in patterns. The same waves that rocked the Hunley now rock container ships, sailboats, and the occasional curious dolphin. To the sea, everything is just another ripple. If you lean close enough to hear it, the ocean's rhythm starts to sync with your breathing again. In, out, in, out. Each inhale pulls a century forward. Each exhale lets it drift away. The stories dissolve until only calm remains. Far beneath the surface, other wrecks lie scattered like punctuation marks in an unfinished poem. Wooden ships with names half forgotten. Bronze cannons softened by barnacles. Amphorae resting on their sides, still smelling faintly of wine. The sea stores them all carefully, the way we might keep old letters in a drawer, knowing we'll never reread them, but unwilling to throw them away. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear those stories bumping gently against each other, like books rearranging on a shelf. And somewhere among them, the Hunley hums softly to itself. Not a song of sorrow, but of endurance. The hum of metal remembering muscle. Scientists once drained her conservation tank briefly, just to examine the hull. As the water lowered, air touched iron that hadn't felt it since 1864. They said the sound was like a sigh, a small hiss, the sea letting go. Even then, she didn't creak or protest. She simply existed, quietly patient, as though she knew this was all part of the long conversation between ocean and time. I like to think the sea enjoys such conversations. It spent billions of years talking to rocks, to whales, to drifting bottles of messages no one reads. So when a submarine joined the dialogue, the sea listened kindly, then wrapped it in silt for safekeeping. That's what good friends do. And perhaps that's why stories like this feel so soothing. They remind us that forgetting isn't the same as losing. The world keeps its own backups. Waves, soil, fossils, DNA, all waiting until someone asks kindly enough to listen. Just as you're listening now, maybe you've had your own version of a buried submarine, a half-finished project, a lost letter, a dream that sank quietly beneath the surface of daily life. Don't worry, the sea of time remembers those too. Someday, a gentle current, a friend, a memory, a quiet evening will bring them back to light. You'll lift them up, brush off the silt, and recognize them with a smile. Oh, you'll say, there you are. That's the tender magic of remembering. If you were to visit Charleston on a misty morning, you might find the harbour glass still, gulls tracing lazy arcs overhead. The museum doors open early. The first visitors shuffle in. Inside, the room is cool, echoing faintly. There she is, the Hunley, resting under calm water. Tiny bubbles cling to her hull like stars. The air hums softly from the pumps, the same sound as distant waves in a seashell. People whisper without meaning to. Even the smallest child senses the reverence. Some linger longer than others. A few touch the glass gently, as though to thank her for surviving long enough to be found. And if you listen closely in that hush, you might catch a faint sound, metal expanding, water settling, imagination filling the gaps. It almost sounds like breathing. That's the sea's trick, you see. It never truly lets go. In another 100 years, when our own time has become someone else's bedtime story, maybe another narrator will whisper about this one. They'll talk about the people who loved history enough to fall asleep to it, about the voices that carried those tales across midnight. The sea will still be here, nodding along, proud to be the archivist of everything. So as we near the end of our journey, let the noise of the world fade away. Let the hum of engines and screens dissolve into the simple rhythm of waves. You can feel it now, the gentle rocking of the sea beneath the words. In, out, in, out. You've been breathing with the Hunley all along. The sea never forgets, and neither will you, though the memory may return only in dreams. A glint of lantern light on iron, a line of bubbles rising toward moonlight, the steady turn of a crank that sounds almost like a heartbeat. Tonight, the past isn't something to study, it's something to rest inside. You can curl up in it, the way the crew curled around their handles, the way the submarine curled under its blanket of waves. You're safe here. You're remembered too. So breathe slowly, my friend. Let the salt air fill your lungs in imagination. Let your thoughts drift like seaweed, aimless but untroubled. Somewhere far below, the Hunley is still dreaming of the surface, and the sea is still listening. That's enough. And when morning comes, whenever that is for you, she'll still be there, resting, as all stories eventually do. And now, dear listener, we've reached the quiet shore of our long voyage. The tide has brought us home, the lanterns are low, and the sea hums softly just beyond your window. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. May you rest knowing that even forgotten things can be found again. If this story helped you drift away, or simply kept you company through the night, let me know below. Only if it feels right, and if you'd like more calm journeys through time, you know where to find them. For now, close your eyes. Listen one last time to the sea's gentle breathing. Good night, friends, and sweet dreams.